Hey, bookworms, welcome back. If you're looking for a good book to read, why not try one of the classics? And what could be more classic than Jane Eyre? So let's jump right in. In today's video, we'll explore the plot of Charlotte Brontë's Jane Eyre. Just a heads up, this video may contain spoilers about the book. So if you haven't read it yet and you don't want it to be ruined, then don't click on this video. Also, feel free to pause or rewind the video if you want to think about an answer before I tell you. Alright, let's get into it. So, who is our protagonist and what's her situation at the beginning of the novel? Well, our protagonist is Jane Eyre, a 10-year-old orphan who lives with her aunt and cousin in a home called Gateshead. Jane's parents died when she was young, and her aunt, Mrs. Reed, treats her like a servant and takes out all of her frustrations on poor Jane. Jane's cousin, John, also enjoys bullying Jane and picking on her. One day, Jane stands up for herself after John accuses her of being selfish and grabs her by the hair. Mrs. Reed catches them fighting and punishes Jane for defending herself. As a result, Jane is locked in a room called the Red Room for 10 days without any friends or family to look after her. Later, we discover that the Red Room is where Jane's uncle died, and this traumatic experience makes Jane determined to be strong and never let anyone treat her like that again. Jane's Aunt Reed passes away, and her cousin John leaves Gateshead to go to university. Finally, Jane is able to enjoy some peace and quiet, but this doesn't last long. John returns from university with his new wife and 2 daughters, and he and Jane begin to fight again. Soon after, John and his wife have a baby, and Mrs. Reed calls Jane selfish for wanting to hold the child and wishing that she had a family to love her. Once again, Jane is sent to the Red Room for punishment, where she has visions of her parents. Then she hears a kind voice calling her name. The next morning, Jane goes downstairs and meets a mysterious woman named Bessie, who asks Jane if she wants to go with her to a better place. Jane accepts the offer, and Bessie takes her to see Mrs. Fairfax, who runs a charity school for poor girls called the Lowood Institution. Jane is so happy to finally be away from her nasty cousin and cruel aunt. At Lowood, Jane is initially excited to learn how to read and write. But soon she realizes that Lowood isn't as great as Bessie made it sound. The food is terrible, the dormitories are cold and dirty, and the students aren't allowed to have any fun. The school is run by a man named Mr. Brocklehurst, who pretends to care about the students but really just wants to control them. In fact, he is such a hypocrite that he allows the teachers to beat the students and then yells at them for retaliating. Although the conditions at Lowood are miserable, Jane makes one true friend named Helen Burns, who's a sweet and gentle girl who follows Christian principles. One day, Jane gets in trouble for standing up to one of the teachers, and Helen defends her. After this event, Jane begins to understand that sometimes it is best to turn the other cheek, and that violence isn't always the answer. Unfortunately, typhus breaks out at Lowood, and many students and teachers die. Both Helen and Jane get sick, but Jane survives. After Helen dies, Jane becomes a teacher at Lowood and continues to help the other students learn. Over time, the school improves and Jane becomes head teacher. But she feels unfulfilled and longs for something more. One day, she sees an advertisement for a governess position at Thornfield Hall. Jane decides to apply for the job because she needs a new challenge. When she arrives at Thornfield, she meets Mrs. Fairfax, who tells Jane that she'll be tutoring a young French girl named Jane's first impression of the house is that it's creepy. She hears strange noises and even laughter from inside the walls. However, no one else seems to hear anything, and they all just carry on as normal. One day, Jane meets the master of the house, Edward Rochester. He's a handsome and mysterious man who lost his wife and daughter years ago. Jane and Rochester start to fall in love, but their romance is forbidden since he's her employer and she's just a lowly governess. Despite the odds, they decide to be together, and Rochester proposes to Jane. She happily accepts, and the two prepare to marry. But on the morning of the wedding, Jane is shocked to discover that Rochester is already married to a woman named Bertha Mason, Bertha is a Creole woman from Jamaica whom Rochester married 10 years prior, but he locked her in the attic after she went insane. Devastated and confused, Jane flees Thornfield Hall. As Jane walks through the dark and stormy night, she meets a family of 4 named the Reivers, who take her in and care for her until she's well enough to travel. Eventually, she learns that the Rivers siblings are actually her cousins, and that they inherited a lot of money from their parents. St. John, the oldest brother, is a strict and religious man who asks Jane to marry him so they can do charitable work together. Jane struggles with her feelings for Rochester and her duty to God. On the one hand, she doesn't want to spend her life alone. On the other hand, she doesn't want to compromise her morals by marrying a man who isn't her soulmate. In the end, Jane chooses to follow her heart and rejects St. John's proposal. After making this decision, Jane suddenly hears Rochester's voice calling her name telepathically. She knows in her heart that she has to return to him. When Jane arrives back at Thornfield, she finds out that the house is destroyed and burned to the ground. It turns out that Bertha died in the fire, and Rochester tried to save her but lost his sight in the process. Though heartbroken, Jane is happy to be reunited with Rochester, and they finally get to live happily ever after. In the end, Rochester regains some of his sight and he and Jane have a son. And there you have it, the plot of Jane Eyre in 6 minutes. If you've read the book, then feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. If you've never read it before, then hopefully this video has convinced you to give it a try. Thanks for watching. See you next time.